Hello there, fairies and fawns, satyrs and silkies. Today I am going to be doing something completely new for me. I am going to be teaching you how to make this spring witch hat made out of moss. I was inspired by an artwork by Una Woodruff that I saw a couple of years ago, and I've been wanting to make this hat ever since, but I just recently got all the supplies that I needed for it, so I'm going to try and do a tutorial here for you and show you how to make one for yourself as well. But if you're looking for a professional grade tutorial, you can just skip right on by. This is my first tutorial I've ever done, and also this was a messy, sloppy, difficult, well, it wasn't difficult, it was just not tranquil to make this hat. So I'm happy with the end result, but it does take a lot of hot glue and a lot of a mess, so keep on watching and you'll see how to make one too. So this is the artwork by Una Woodruff that I was so inspired by. I found this a couple of years ago and really wanted to make it. Here are your supplies. You have a hat from Dollar Tree, that was just $1, some duct tape, some extra silk flowers that I had lying around, a pen, some scissors. This is 7 sheets of moss that are sold at Dollar Tree in the springtime. Another pair of larger scissors. Didn't end up using the Scotch tape. Some hot glue and some ribbon trim there. And of course a hot glue gun. This is some moss trim that I ended up using more of than I expected to. And then a bag full of loose moss. Everything here just about came from Dollar Tree except for the moss ribbon. Alright, so the first thing you want to do is to open up your paper bag and cut it into a curved cone shape. Duct tape along the edge there, and then you want to add that to the top of your hat. And I just used duct tape for it didn't quite fit down along the brim, but it doesn't matter because the whole thing's going to be covered. Now this is the part where I forgot, well, I didn't forget to film. I thought I was filming, and then I didn't end up filming, so you missed the part where I covered the whole hat. But I can tell you that all I did was I put a full moss sheet vertically. I glued it vertically on the hat, and it took me forever to get it to stay down, and then I just started cutting little pieces of the moss sheets, patchwork, willy-nilly, till I got to about 5 inches from the top, and then I ended up having to use some of the moss trim to kind of wrap around it to the top point. So here I'm trying to decide how to cover the brim. And at first I thought, well, I'm going to cut a piece of the moss sheets, but that just wasn't working. So I did end up having to use the moss trim that I had on hand. You notice I'm going to be replacing the hot glue sticks a lot throughout this process. I used a lot of hot glue sticks. So what you want to do is you want to glue down the moss ribbon trim, and since the brim of the hat is curved, you kind of have to do a little bit of a pin tuck and fold it back on itself in order to get the angle of the curve right. So you can see I'm gluing it down, and then I go back and I kind of glue down the little pin tuck that I have to take in the quote-unquote fabric of the moss trim. So getting another ribbon. I ended up using 2 full ribbons in order to make this hat. And I think, gosh, I've had this ribbon for several years, but I think I originally got it at Michael's. I have seen ribbon like this at the stores. This was on sale for $2 per roll. And I believe just about all the other supplies, except for the flowers, all came from the Dollar Tree. So this hat probably cost about, I would guess, about $10, $12 to make overall, if you don't count, well, yeah, even if you do count the supplies that I had on hand, it was probably about $10 or $12. So I'm continuing to glue around the hat with the ribbon trim and do those little pin tucks in order to create the curve. And you can see that there's a gap at the top and there's a gap at the bottom, but thankfully when you're working with moss, it doesn't have to look smooth and perfect. I mean, we already had to patchwork the top, the cone, in order to make it work, so the whole thing's kind of supposed to look like a motley forest witch anyway, so it's totally fine. So I'm taking little pieces of a dark moss and kind of starting to patch the top and the sides. Then I decided to go ahead and start working on the bottom of the brim, and this is me thinking to myself, what the heck am I going to do here? I had no idea what I was going to do, and I finally realized that the ribbon trim really wasn't going to work, and the moss sheets really weren't going to work. So what I ended up having to do was just take a bunch of my loose moss that I had on hand and just glue it down bit by bit. This was probably the most time-consuming part of the whole process, and definitely the messiest part of the whole process. But I like how it turned out because the color of the moss that I had on hand, that I had enough of in order to cover the whole brim, was a slightly lighter color than the green of the moss sheets and the green of the ribbon that I had. So it kind of created a multi-textural effect. It almost, it's almost like if you had a lovely Easter hat and you had lace along the edge of it. So I decided not to film the whole process of covering the inside of the brim because it took, like I said, it was the most time-consuming part. But the inside of the brim is now all covered. And right now I'm working on adding that same lighter colored moss along the edge of the top of the brim of the hat where there was a gap where the ribbon trim wasn't quite wide enough. And once again, you can kind of see in the video how this kind of created a multicolor effect, almost like a really fancy lace along the edge of a brim of an Easter Sunday hat. So when you have the hat sitting, it looks perfect, but when you lift it up, you can see that there's a gap between the cone of the hat and the brim of the hat. So this is me going around and adding some more of the darker colored moss that I had, the stuff that better matches the green of the moss sheets and the moss trim. I went ahead and added more of that where the weight of the hat kind of creates a gap there along the edge. Once again, this was a bit of a time-consuming project, but it was fun and very messy. You can see I'm starting to get quite a collection of moss around my feet there. Oh, and I forgot to mention on the list of supplies that I would highly recommend, unless you're doing this outside or you have a dedicated space that you can sweep up really easily, to get a plastic tablecloth. It was really easy to clean up everything afterwards. I just kind of rolled up the tablecloth and then did a little bit of a spot vacuum. So here, I mentioned earlier that in order to finish off the point of the cone of the hat, oh, here comes one of my cats. I mentioned earlier in order to finish off the cone of the hat, I had to use ribbon trim, and the ribbon trim wasn't quite as high quality. Oh, there's my other cat. Wasn't quite as high quality as the moss sheets, so I had to do some spot gluing in order to cover some patches where you could see the burlap underneath it. And this is me realizing that my cats being in the room really wasn't going to work very well, so I had to shoo them out of the room, which was, you've heard of herding cats. That wasn't very easy. All right, so I realized I think I'm kind of done. Took off my flower crown and looked in the mirror to see how it looked, and I was pretty happy with the result here. So the next thing to do after I clean up was to add the leafy ribbon trim. You can use any ribbon trim on here that you think is pretty. I happen to have this gorgeous organic leaf trim that a friend had sent me. Thank you, Bryony. And I went ahead and just hot glued this down along the edge of the hat as the hat band. The nice thing about this particular ribbon trim is that it kind of created an invisible seam because I just cut along the edge of one of the full, leaves there so that it kind of overlapped on itself and you can't tell where the edge of the trim is. Gluing, gluing, gluing. Can't wait to wear this out in the forest. I'm hoping that if any other unsuspecting hikers come along, they might do a double take. All right, so a little bit of de-shedding of the hat, and I'm pretty happy with, oh, there we found another patch, another bald spot. Pretty happy with the result here. Adding another hot glue stick to the hot glue gun. I think I probably went through about one full bag from Dollar Tree of hot glue sticks doing this project. All right, so I had this box of silk flowers that I got at a garage sale several years ago. Garage sales are a great place to get silk flowers for projects like this, and I've been working out of it ever since. So I wanted the flowers on here to be very tiny and subtle and spring-like. So I chose the tiniest little flowers that I could find in my box of little silk flower bits. And the nice thing is, a lot of these flowers that I'm putting in, some of them I had to hot glue, but some of them I actually just kind of tucked into places where I'd patched together pieces of the moss sheets at the top. So they should be pretty easy to pull out after springtime, and then maybe this summer I can add some, maybe some clay air foam shelf mushrooms, or I might be able to add some fall leaves in the fall. I should be able to transition this hat to different seasons if I want to and wear it out to the forest. I will say that when you wear this hat, you will get some moss in your hair, but it just adds to the organic appeal, right? Who doesn't want moss in their hair? It just makes you feel more like a dryad. This was a very fun process, adding the flowers, because it just felt so organic, like the hat was telling me where the flowers wanted to go. It's kind of a magical process. Definitely the least stressful part of this whole project. So I'm just adding a few more tiny little red flowers, tucking them here and there, letting them tell me where they want to sit, where they want to be. There it is. Hooray, finished hat. So I hope you enjoyed this process. There is the finished hat, and I would love to see, if you end up making one of your own, how yours turns out. Once again, Dollar Tree sells those moss sheets in the summer, in the spring. Enjoy making your hat.